Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I watched a show that Debbie did, I think it was a day or so ago. She was terrifying. She was on fire. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Look man, sometimes you have to get it out. So, fair enough. The reason for this video though is something specific. In the show she mentioned that you could tell she was exasperated with all of it, whether it was just the politics of what's been going on. And she got to the point of saying, yeah, I'm not doing stories on this anymore. I'm not talking about Sanders. I'm not talking about... And it felt like she was saying she was moving away from politics or moving away from maybe a focus on politics into something else, something a little bit more external from the political process. I saw that and look, your appraisal of any particular person is always going to be slightly off. There's no way to know what makes up that person, whatever that even means. I don't know what that means. I guess what I can say is, you know, when you're looking at somebody, and you, right off the bat, you don't necessarily know anything about them, but just from your interactions, the things they say, the things that they do, your experiences, it's almost like a mental map in your head of the person. It's a model of sorts. It's unacknowledged. I don't even think it necessarily has any form to it, and yet, conceptually, it's there. It's presence of sorts. And that's the best way I can explain it. Think about when you think about a person, that's somebody that you see, somebody you interact with. Think about that person when they're not there. And think about what you think about that person. It's invisible to you. It's almost like it's invisible to you. You almost don't even perceive that it's there. But you are making an appraisal of an individual. And that appraisal is what you're conceptually seeing is who that person is. That's a long-winded thing of saying, yes, my appraisal to some degree is going to be off. But insofar as me understanding where she's coming from, or at the very least I've said the same things or felt the same way, I get it. I totally get it. You look at the world and you say, this doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't make sense to me. And that just doesn't make sense to me. And trying to take this impression or trying to take the perspective of, all right, how do you move from point A to point B to a better place? And the best outcome is always out of reach. It's always out of reach. So, and beyond the best outcome being out of reach, you're dealing with corruption. You're dealing with people who are constantly lying, who have incentives, who have things that they want to accomplish that override everything else in regards to your priorities, meaning a better world. That is frustrating. That is absolutely aggravating. You're looking at one situation after the next. For example, you said society can be arranged any way you want society to be arranged. People get stuck on these isms. Oh, that's socialism, that's communism, that's capitalism, that's whatever. I don't care about what the name of it is. I don't even know what the name of it means. You can have 10 people and those things mean 10 different things to all of those people. I have no idea. It's like somebody saying, you're a feminist. Okay, but I don't know what that means. I know what I mean by that. I don't know what you mean by that. Which is kind of the problem. Language is ridiculously subjective. Meaning, sayings. People would literally use sayings as being their justification for something, not realizing that those sayings don't mean anything because nobody understands what they themselves as individuals mean what they're saying. So somebody's saying, well, capitalism is the best system. I don't like socialism. Yeah, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. I don't know what any of that means. What I do know is you can arrange the world any way you want to. There is nothing above you that is forcing you to organize yourself in this particular way. Now, the moment that you're outside the box looking at the world in that way, everything else is fucking frustrating. It's frustrating. Because ultimately, I understand the incentives that built into a particular model to get certain people to behave a particular way. I get the assholeness that comes along with somebody accruing a huge amount of wealth, this mental illness of sorts. But I don't understand why people conform to it. That's the part what always loses me. It's the people who are so willing to subordinate themselves to a particular task, or they're so willing just to follow these arbitrary rules. I mean, even to the degree of saying a political process and not being so engaged in the political process, you force the things the way you want them to go. Yes, I know there's divide and conquer associated with it. But even still, I still get amazed that people fall into these fantasies and these lies. So yes, if you're looking at the world in that way, you're watching the news show, And you're looking at it and you're saying, those guys are lying through their teeth. That's aggravating to watch. It's aggravating to watch. You've seen me watch it. It's aggravating to watch when you know they're lying to you. You see a politician. The politician says something. You're saying that guy's lying to you. Over and over, you're finding people who are saying things and doing things not because they're functioning with integrity. The opposite. They're doing it because they have other objectives. Even, in her case, somebody she full-throatedly supported, Bernie Sanders. I would imagine that is a trying thing. So I understand the frustration associated with doing it. Even by the name itself, Sane Progressive, you on some level understand that what you're engaging yourself in is a certain amount of insanity. So you can try to make that world into something a little bit more sane for people who are viewing that world. I get it. I understand it. I full well understand that. There was a saying where it's, what was it? Have pity on the man who thinks he's free and can't, for the life of him, see his chains. Have more pity on the guy who understands that he is a slave and can do nothing else about it. Meaning he's stuck, still pursuing those ends, while this guy is over here screaming at the top of his lungs that he's free. Yes, I get it. Your view of the world is different. Whether you realize it or not, though, you have a show purely because your view of the world is different. If your view of the world was the same as everybody else, you wouldn't have a show. It's almost like your trait, your ability, the thing that you're good at, intrinsically, just for who you are, is dealing with the muck, dealing with the insanity, dealing with people who are lying to the public, dealing with people who are trying to start wars, dealing with people who are trying to hurt other people purely for their own ends. Is there a nobility in failure? Is what I think this boils down to. And it really does. Meaning, is there something to be said that failing, in and of itself, being tragic, is still noble? Now granted, let's bake it into the cake, that this boils down to the consciousness involved. Look, there's no meaning to it at all, ultimately. There's no fundamental meaning without something there to give it an appraisal of meaning. So bake that into the cake. I'm saying, though, from my own perspective, yes, there is. Meaning knowing that you're pushing up a boulder, or pushing a boulder up a hill that has no precipice. Knowing full well that you're engaging in something, day in and day out, that you would never necessarily win, and that you would never bring about the world that you yourself want. And doing it anyway. Persisting in spite of. Yeah, there is nobility to that. Yeah, you do get up every morning, and you do look at the things that people are saying. Because ultimately, if you can affect one person, 2 people, 10 people, you have thousands of people who watch your show. Those people, at one point, may talk to somebody else who, for the most part, wakes that person up. You're not going to get everybody. You're going to get people calling you cynical. You're going to get people calling you all sorts of bad names. I get it. Is there nobility in dealing with that particular situation? Realizing that you are not going to ever accomplish your ends. Realizing you're going to be consistently frustrated by the way people behave, by the lack of integrity that is part of the process itself. And still persisting on. I say yes. I say yes. I say it's a noble thing. Ultimately, your goal in this is not necessarily to win. Your goal is to open minds. If you can pry them open a few degrees, then yeah, you've done a good thing. That's your task. That's what you're good at. Here's the information about what's going on. Yes, I would prefer you to think of it in a different way. I would prefer you to open your mind on it. But at the very least, here's the information. Do with it what you will. You need that level of sanity in the world. Meaning, look, I get it. It's aggravating. I get it. It's aggravating. But at some point, something in you got you up one morning and said, okay, I'm going to do a video. I'm sick of what's going on out there. Has that changed? Has what's going out there somehow fundamentally changed between the time you started versus the time you are now? I've made this case that no, you're probably not going to succeed in your objectives. It depends on what your objectives are, though. No, you're not going to get people to essentially go their own way with Sanders. You might not. Will you get thousands of people to listen to you and think to yourself, okay, maybe she has a point? Yes, you will do that. You will do that. Will your numbers grow as your time goes on? And will that influence grow along with your numbers? Yes. That's also true. That's also true. I guess I'm making this point of saying, buck up. Buck up. I get it, man. It's not fun. And ultimately, when you're in a situation where you're like, I don't understand why people are behaving this way. These guys are trying to take us to war and they're just going along with it. I don't understand why the media is acting this way. This seems insane to me. Their behavior seems psychopathic. I get it. I get it. I say it every day. I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm making a point that not getting it, feeling annoyed by it, doesn't matter. It's part of the task. Part of your thing, the thing that you do when you're getting animated and you're kind of getting across this emotional force of, this is really fucked up. How is a sane person supposed to regard to insanity? Right? I mean, ultimately, that's what we're talking about too. How does a sane individual focus? How does he deal with insanity? Like, if you see somebody get shot in front of you, is your response to just kind of wipe your shirt off? Or is your response to say, holy shit, somebody just got shot in front of me? Like, what I'm getting at is, the things that we do in our country is grotesque. It's absolutely grotesque. I can't imagine in 100, 200, 300, 400 years, we're not going to look back on this in the same way we look back on ancient Rome. Our behavior is atrocious. I mean, everything from willing to take imaginary paper to make that a determination of whether or not a person can eat, even though those resources exist. We can have factories completely vacant, and yet have plenty of people who are also completely out of work. This is an insane system. We're perfectly okay with people losing healthcare coverage and dying, not because we don't have the resources, again, to take care of those people, but because, for whatever reason, those people didn't have the means to pay for it. We have the overwhelming majority of the world in desperate poverty. Millions and millions of people who are literally dying of starvation. And yet, we have other people who have $50 billion. This makes no sense. This makes no sense. This is not just cruel, it's insanity. We have a system that says we need to use resources as fast as possible, and yet we have a finite planet. The model of the using resources is completely untethered to the actual reality that we do not have infinite resources. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. This subordinate model gives us profit. So in this illusion, we can persist as ourselves as being wealthy and everything else. It's irrelevant to all of this stuff. Ultimately, they say we can maximize our profit. That's all that matters. That's an insane response. All of those things are insanity. How is a sane person supposed to look at the world and react to insanity? How is he supposed to look at insanity? So yeah, you are going to feel stressed out. You are going to feel pissed off and everything else. You are going to be doing shows where you're going to be losing your shit on camera because you're like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? You should do that. You should. That is not just natural as can be when faced with something that's absolutely absurd and doesn't necessarily have to happen. Yeah, you should. Why wouldn't you? What is the typical human response to dealing with something that's absolutely batshit crazy? If you're looking at American politics, you're looking at the way people behave, you're looking at the way people act, you're looking at the things that they say in relation to things in the world that has no relation to what they just said. Yeah, that's a certain amount of insanity. And if people look at that as being normal, it's even more insane. So I get it. I totally get it. I'm making a point that your reality filter on those things is needed. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Your insanity, for the most part, is for a higher good. And yes, there is nobility in the task, even if that task is frustrating, and even if that task has no win associated with the task itself. You're defining your win. Your win in this case is changing minds, even if they're a trickle at a time. It's better than what most people do in a lifetime. So, alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the work through Patreon. I just saw her do a video the other day, and I thought to myself, I get where she's coming from. I understand what she's saying. I feel that way too. You're looking at the world and you're like, I don't understand why people are behaving this way. And these people are consistently lying. And they're absolutely corrupt. And yet, they persist as if they're not. And if they persist as if nobody knows. Like, it's this thing of, it's like an open secret. And when you point out, say, wait a minute. You know those people are corrupt. You know those people are full of shit. It doesn't seem to matter that they are corrupt and that they're full of shit. Like, it's an aggravating thing to be confronted with a false reality everywhere you turn. You look at the news and you're like, but he knows that's not true. He's saying that, and he knows that's not the reason why they're doing it. You look at politics, you hear politicians, you hear Sanders say something about Syria, and you're like, they didn't even do an investigation. He knows that that's not true. You hear Trump saying it was the dead babies that made him do an illegal missile strike. You say to yourself, No, I don't believe it was the dead babies. Trump has already killed many dead babies on his own hands. That can't be the reason he did that. It's one thing after the next. It's one thing after the next. There's truth. It's difficult to find. Because truth is difficult to find, it is frustrating. When you have a certain amount of, wait a minute, these guys are lying to us. And at every turn, you realize they have a self-interest that incentivizes them to make a particular lie. That's frustrating and it's aggravating. I'm saying that your task or your role in that is to, yes, acknowledge that it's aggravating. Yes, if you got to get your rocks off on camera, then get your rocks off on camera and say what you have to say. You're reacting to something that's insane. You're trying to process it in a way that a human being will process. And get it across to other people that, hey, this is insane. And to the degree that I am losing my shit, that's how insane it is, proportional to that. Yeah, I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's easy. I do think it's necessary. And there's a difference in those things. So, try to buck up. Try to buck up. I don't want you to leave politics. I guess that's the main point. I really don't want you to leave politics. I like your take on some of the stuff. Even when I disagree, I at the very least believe you're coming from a good place. Because I agree that you're coming from a good place, whether I agree with you or not, I actually like the content or I like the perspective. So, alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the work through Patreon.